Their father called them both to his bedside on the evening he understood he was not going to recover. He was not a man who made speeches. He had never gathered his family for announcements or arranged his feelings into performances. But that evening, with the specific clarity that arrives in people when the time for pretending has passed, he called his 2 daughters into his room and gave each of them something. One daughter received her instruction and said yes immediately. The other received hers, nodded slowly, and said yes. But the second yes was not agreement. It was the beginning of a calculation. And before that night was over, the daughter who had said yes first would be asked to give up the very thing her father had promised her. She would give it up because she loved her family more than she loved the future she was losing. She would do it quietly and without drama, and without knowing that what she was releasing was far less valuable than what was already waiting for her in a direction nobody in that room was looking. The daughter who took it would spend years believing she had been clever. She had not been clever. She had simply chosen first, and choosing first is not the same thing as choosing well. If this kind of story is why you are on this channel, like this video right now and subscribe. Share it with one person who is standing at a choice that looks like loss and needs to hear that the path that looks smaller is not always the one that leads to less. Drop your country in the comments and stay with me, because what happens when these 2 sisters finally sit across from each other years later is the part of this story that will stay with you longest. Their father's name was Daniel. He was a man of moderate means and considerable character, which is a combination that the world frequently underestimates because the world has a habit of looking at the wrong column. He had spent his adult life doing what the men of his generation did in the communities they came from. He worked, he showed up, he kept his word, he paid what he owed, and he believed with the specific conviction of someone who had tested the belief many times that how you treated people when you had nothing to gain from treating them well was the only reliable measure of who you actually were. He had 2 daughters. The older one was named Ada. Ada had her father's stillness, not the stillness of someone with nothing to say, but the stillness of someone who had learned early that not every thought required a stage and not every grievance required an audience. She worked without needing to be noticed for working. She absorbed small costs quietly. She let arguments dissolve rather than feeding them, which people sometimes mistook for weakness, and which was actually the particular strength of someone who had decided what mattered and had no interest in defending things that did not. She had her father's eyes, not the color, the quality, the way of looking at a situation and seeing what was actually there rather than what she had arrived hoping to find. The younger daughter was named Vivian. Vivian was beautiful in a way that had taught her certain things about the world that were true but incomplete. She had learned that the world softened its edges for certain faces. She had learned that her mother found it difficult to say no to her. She had learned that Ada would absorb a cost before allowing a conflict to escalate. These were all true observations, but she had made the mistake of understanding them as permanent features of the landscape rather than temporary accommodations that the landscape would eventually stop making. She was not mean-spirited. She was not calculating in the way of someone who has sat down and designed a strategy. She was accustomed. And accustomedness, when it goes unexamined long enough, produces its own particular kind of blindness. Their mother, Rose, loved both daughters with the complete love that good mothers have. But she had a way of looking at Vivian that she did not have for Ada. The look of someone who has decided that one of their children is more fragile than the other and has organized the household accordingly. This was an act of love. It was also the thing that left Vivian least prepared for what the world would eventually ask of her. Daniel saw this. He said little. He stored it. He loved his younger daughter without enabling her the way Rose did, which meant that Vivian found him slightly harder to manage than her mother, and therefore slightly more trustworthy, though she did not put it in those terms. There was an evening, about a year before Daniel became ill, when Ada and Vivian had an argument about something small that Ada can no longer fully remember. What she does remember is that Rose had come in and had looked at her the way she always looked at her and had said, "You are the older one, Ada." And Ada had swallowed the argument and gone to her room. Daniel came to her door that evening. He did not come in. He simply stood in the doorway. "I know," he said. Ada looked at him. "I see it. I know it is not fair," he said. Ada said nothing. "You have more character than you know what to do with," he said. "One day, that will be worth something." He went back to the sitting room. Ada sat in her room for a long time, thinking about whether being told you had character was the same thing as being told you would be all right. She decided it probably was. She just couldn't see exactly how yet. Daniel had been ill for 3 months when he finally asked Rose to bring both daughters to his room. The room smelled of the eucalyptus oil Rose had been applying to his chest in the evenings, and faintly of the specific dryness of a room that has had its windows closed too long. The lamp on the bedside table threw a warm, uneven light. His hands on the blanket were thinner than Ada remembered them being even 3 weeks before. Ada sat beside his bed. Vivian stood near the window with the particular restlessness of someone who is uncomfortable with stillness and has not learned to sit with difficult things. Daniel looked at them both for a long moment. The looking itself was a kind of goodbye, and Ada understood this and felt the understanding settle in her chest like something heavy placed carefully. He spoke slowly. He told them about 2 promises. The first was to his old friend Emmanuel, a promise made 22 years ago when they were both younger men who still believed that the future could be designed across generations through the right agreements. Emmanuel had a son, Chidi. Chidi was educated and serious, and had built a trading company in the city that had expanded in the last 2 years. He was not flashy. He did not announce himself, but people who knew the business world knew his name and said it with a particular kind of respect. He told Ada that Chidi had been chosen for her. Ada received this the way she received most things, with full attention and without immediate reaction. She did not perform gratitude or resistance. She looked at her father's hands, thin on the blanket, and she thought about what it meant that he had arranged this for her. "If this is what you want," she said, "I will honor it." Daniel squeezed her hand. The squeeze was weak. That was the thing that stayed with her afterward, the weakness of it. He turned to Vivian. He told her about Mr. Okafor, about a night 24 years ago when Rose had gone into early labor and the roads were difficult and the nearest hospital was far. Mr. Okafor had not hesitated. He had carried Rose to his vehicle at 2 in the morning and driven for 2 hours through roads that were not kind to any vehicle and had stayed until the doctors came out and told him both mother and child were going to be all right. He had never asked for anything. Daniel had been carrying that night for 24 years. Mr. Okafor had a son, Emeka. Emeka was gentle and hardworking and ran his father's small transport business with the quiet loyalty of someone for whom his father's name was not simply a name but a standard. He told Vivian that Emeka had been chosen for her. Vivian nodded slowly. She said the right words, but her eyes had moved to somewhere her father could not follow. Daniel did not see this, or perhaps he did, and chose to believe the words rather than the eyes, because he was a man who had always preferred to trust people and did not have the energy left to revise that preference. He made them both promise. Ada said yes immediately. Vivian said yes after a pause that was almost nothing and could have been mistaken for thought. Daniel closed his eyes. Rose began to cry quietly. Ada kept her hand in her father's until she felt the warmth of it change. Daniel died 3 weeks later. His funeral gathered many people. Among them were Emmanuel and his son Chidi, who arrived dressed simply but with the ease of people accustomed to being in different kinds of rooms. Vivian saw Chidi from across the yard. He was handsome in the built way, the way of someone whose confidence has been assembled through achievement rather than inherited through family. People near him were talking about the business, about contracts, about expansion, about the kind of future that produces a particular quality of air around the person who is at its center. Ada noticed Vivian noticing. "Vivian," she said quietly. Vivian did not look away. "You are not what I expected," she said. "You are not expecting him. You are expecting Emeka." Vivian smiled, a particular smile, the smile of someone who is revising a plan. Ada recognized that smile. She had grown up watching it. She turned and looked for Emeka herself. He was near the back of the gathering, not at the center where Chidi was. He had organized a small group of young men to manage the practical necessities of the day, the chairs and the food and the movement of elderly guests from one part of the compound to another. He was moving between tasks with the focused energy of someone who had identified what needs doing and is doing it without requiring acknowledgement or instruction. At one point, he was struggling with a large cooler, and Ada walked over. "Let me help," she said. He looked up, genuinely surprised. "You don't have to," he said. "I know. That is usually why people help." He laughed, a real laugh, not the performance of one. The laugh of someone who had not expected to laugh today and was slightly surprised to find himself doing it. "Thank you," he said. They moved the cooler together. When they were done, Ada walked away without looking back. Emeka stood for a moment looking after her. He thought about that moment for several days afterward without fully understanding why. But before we go any further, I need to tell you something about Vivian that this story will not tell you if I do not stop here and tell it. Because it would be easy, hearing about Vivian and her plan and her smile, to decide that she was simply a selfish person and that what happened to her later was simply justice. That would be a comfortable story. It would also be less than the truth. There was a version of Vivian that existed underneath their accustomedness, a version that her father had occasionally reached and that Ada had always known was there. One evening, about a month before Daniel became ill, the two sisters had sat together on the back steps of their family home in the specific darkness of a rural evening when the day has fully released its heat. Vivian had been talking about a friend whose engagement had ended, and she had been genuinely distressed about it, not for dramatic effect, but in the way of someone who is imagining themselves into another person's pain. "I think what she is most afraid of," Vivian had said, "is starting over. Not the embarrassment, the actual starting over." Ada had looked at her sister. "You understand that?" she had asked. "Of course I understand it," Vivian had said, slightly annoyed by the question. "I am afraid of it too." Ada had been quiet for a moment. "What are you afraid of starting over from?" she had asked. Vivian had thought about it for a long time before answering. "Nothing," she had finally said. "That is what I am afraid of, starting from nothing." Ada had understood then that Vivian's pursuit of security was not simply greed, it was fear, a specific and genuine fear of the kind of nothing that their parents had worked very hard to keep their daughters from ever having to have known. This did not excuse every choice Vivian made, but it explained something that pure greed could not explain, and Ada carried this understanding into everything that followed. Several weeks after the funeral, Rose called both daughters into the sitting room. She told them that both families had been in contact. The formal introduction visit would begin soon. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mama, I cannot marry Emeka." The room changed quality. Rose looked at her. "What did you just say?" "I said I cannot marry him." The voice of someone who has rehearsed this and is executing rather than deciding. "I want Chidi." Ada looked at her sister. Rose began to speak about Daniel's wishes, about the promise, about what it meant to honor a dying father's arrangement. Vivian had an answer for each of these things. She had prepared answers. The answers were not dishonest exactly. They were the answers of someone who has found the version of the truth that supports the conclusion they have already reached. Finally, she said, "Let Ada marry Emeka. She is stronger than me. She can manage." Ada felt something move through her. Not anger, something more specific than anger. The recognition of a pattern she had been living inside for as long as she could remember. The assumption that her strength made her less in need of consideration. The conversion of her capacity into her obligation. She looked at her sister. "I am not a resource, Vivian," she said quietly. "I am a person." Vivian looked at her. Something moved across her face, something that was not quite guilt, but was in the direction of it. Then Rose looked at Ada, and Ada saw in her mother's face the familiar lean, the assumption, the belief that Ada would find a way to absorb this the way she had absorbed every other cost, because that was what Ada did. Mama, Ada said carefully, if I agree to this, I need you to understand something. I am not agreeing because it does not cost me anything. I am agreeing because I am choosing to. Those are completely different things, and I need you to know that. Rose nodded, the nod of someone who has heard and will carry this for a long time. Ada looked at the floor for a moment. She thought about Chidi, whom she had never spoken to. She thought about Emeka, who had laughed genuinely at something she said in the yard. She thought about her father's hand on the blanket and the weakness of the squeeze, and the thing he had come to her door to say the evening after the argument that Ada could no longer fully remember. She thought about what she was actually choosing and what she was actually giving up, and whether they were really the same thing. She was not certain. That uncertainty was honest, and she held it. All right, she said. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time. She did not cry immediately. She sat with the decision first and let it become real before she allowed herself to feel it. This was how she had always handled difficult things. Establish the reality, then feel it, not the other way round. When she cried, it was quiet and complete, and when it was over, it was over. She set her alarm. She went to sleep. The meeting with Emeka was arranged at the Okafor family home. He was nervous. The nervousness was visible in the way he held himself, too upright, too careful, the posture of someone bracing for an impression to be formed about them. Ada noticed immediately and decided not to pretend she had not. You do not have to perform anything for me, she said. He looked at her. What do you mean? I mean I am not here to be impressed. I am here to meet you. He sat back slightly. The bracing reduced. What do you want to know? He asked. Ada thought about it genuinely. What do you care about most? He was quiet, not because he didn't have an answer, because he was deciding whether to give the real one or a safer version. He gave the real one. My father's name, he said. He spent his entire life being honest in a business where honesty is not always the most profitable approach. He built a reputation that traveled ahead of him. People trusted him before they met him because of what they had heard. He paused. I want to build something that earns that kind of trust, not because of his name, but because I actually earned it. Another pause. That means it will probably take longer than it would take someone willing to cut corners. I am aware of that. I am not willing to change it. Ada looked at him for a long moment. She had prepared for this meeting like she prepared for everything. She had thought about what she would look for and what she would not be able to overlook and what questions she needed answered. She had not prepared for that answer. Why not? She asked. Why not cut corners? Everyone does. Not everyone, Emeka said. Most people. My father didn't, he said, and I am still here because of it. Ada was quiet. Most people would find that answer disappointing, she said. Yes, he agreed. I don't, she said. He looked at her. Why not? Ada thought about her father's hands on the blanket and the weakness of the squeeze, and the thing he had come to her door to say the evening after the argument that Ada could no longer fully remember. She said, because a man who cares about whether he earns something is a man you can trust, and a man you can trust is the foundation a life can actually be built on. Emeka looked at her for a moment. I was certain you would be disappointed, he said. I know, Ada said. I could see you bracing for it when I arrived. He laughed again, the same real laugh from the yard, the laugh of someone who has found themselves surprised in a good direction. I am not disappointed, Ada said. Not at all. Now, let me tell you about Chidi. Because it would be easy to see him simply as the wrong choice and to think that anyone paying attention should have been able to see that. But Chidi was not obviously wrong. He was charming and educated, and the business was genuinely successful at the time Vivian met him. When he smiled at her across the table at their first formal meeting, it was a real smile. When he told her he had heard good things about her, there was warmth in it. He had been raised with money and had developed the specific confidence that grows in people raised with money, a confidence that can look from the outside very similar to capability. It was not capability, but it looked enough like it that a reasonable person, standing at the beginning of that story, would not necessarily have known. Vivian sat across from him and felt the future she had designed taking shape around her. She was genuinely happy in that moment. This matters. Not because it excuses anything, but because a person who makes choices from genuine desire rather than pure calculation deserves to have that acknowledged. Vivian wanted a good life. She believed Chidi was the path to it. She was wrong about the path. She was not wrong to want the destination. The wedding day arrived. Vivian and Chidi were married in a ceremony that reflected the resources available to them. The hall was decorated. The guests were many. Vivian moved through the day with the particular ease of someone who has arrived somewhere they have been imagining for a long time. She was radiant. That is the honest word. Whatever else was true, she was radiant that day. Emeka arrived at the church for his wedding to Ada on a motorcycle. Not an old one particularly, but clearly not a car. Not the kind of vehicle that a certain category of wedding guest expected a groom to arrive on. Comments were made. Emeka heard them. He parked. He straightened his jacket. He walked toward the church entrance without adjusting his pace or acknowledging the comments. Ada, who had been told, came out to meet him. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "People are talking." He looked at her. "Let them. People talked about my father too. He built something anyway." Ada looked at him. Something settled in her. Not dramatically, quietly. The specific settling of someone who has made a choice they are uncertain about and has just received a piece of information that reduces the uncertainty. "Let's go in," she said. He offered her his arm. She took it. The first month of their marriage were honest in the way that genuinely difficult things are honest. Nothing about their small rented house pretended to be more than it was. The electricity was unreliable. The roads nearby were not smooth. Money required careful management, and some months the careful management was not enough, and some purchases were simply not made. Ada did not complain, not because she had suppressed the impulse, but because she had examined the situation and determined that complaining would make it neither better nor more bearable. But there were evenings. There was one evening in the 4th month, after Emeka had come home tired and had eaten dinner quietly and gone to bed, when Ada sat in the kitchen alone and allowed herself to think the thought she had been managing since the wedding. She thought about Vivian, not with bitterness, with honesty. She thought about the house Vivian was living in, and the furniture and the security of money that was real and available. She thought about what her father had originally promised her and what she had agreed to release. She sat with the question, had she made the right choice? She did not arrive at a clean answer that evening. She arrived at something else, something smaller and more useful. She thought about the laugh, Emeka's laugh in the yard at the funeral, genuine and surprised, the laugh of someone who had not expected to laugh that day. She thought about his answer in the meeting room, about his father's name and what it meant to him, about a man who decided to earn things rather than take shortcuts, even when shortcuts were available and the long way was slower. She thought about whether she had ever heard Chidi laugh like that. She had not met Chidi, but she had met the kind of confidence he carried. She had seen it before, the confidence of someone who trusts the surface because they have never had to test it. She sat in the kitchen. She did not arrive at certainty. She arrived at enough. Enough to set her alarm, enough to get up tomorrow and do what the day required, enough to believe that the things Emeka was building were being built on something real. She went to bed. There came an evening in the first year when Emeka came home with the specific weight of someone who has absorbed something they have not yet found a way to put down. He sat at the table without speaking. Ada set food in front of him. "Tell me," she said. He looked up. "I did not say anything. You have a particular face when something has happened." He was quiet for a moment. "I put in a bid for a municipal transport contract. 3 vehicles, 1 year. The kind of contract that would have changed our cash position significantly. He paused. I did not get it. Ada sat down across from him. She did not say anything immediately. She waited. Emeka looked at her. Are you not going to say anything? I am thinking about what to say. Most people would say it is all right, that another opportunity will come. That is true, but it is not the most useful thing I can tell you right now. He looked at her. 2 weeks, she said. You spent 2 weeks on that bid. Yes. What do you know now that you did not know 3 weeks ago? Emeka was quiet. About the process, Ada continued. About what the committee was looking for. About the gap between what you submitted and what they selected. What do you actually know now? He thought about it. He began to speak slowly about the scoring criteria he had underweighted, about the way the successful bidder presented their safety record, about a section of the application he had not fully understood until he saw the result. Ada listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, So you paid 2 weeks for information that you will use for the rest of your career. Emeka looked at her. That is one way to see it, he said. It is the accurate way, Ada said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Ada? Yes? I do not know what I deserve to be with you. She smiled. You answered a question honestly when you could have given a safer answer. He looked at her. That was the day. That was when I understood. He reached across the table and held her hand. They ate dinner. Outside, the unreliable electricity hummed, and the road was not smooth, and the month had been careful and would remain careful for a few more days. Neither of them minded. He submitted the next bid. He did not get that one either. He submitted the one after that. He got it. And then a larger one. And then a man came to their house one evening, representing a logistics company that had been watching Emeka's operation and was interested in a genuine partnership, not subcontracting, shared ownership, access to an established client base, a formal stake in something already moving. Emeka sat across from the man for a long meeting. After the man left, he sat at the kitchen table in the particular stillness of someone who has just been offered something that changes the size of the room. Ada came in from the garden. She looked at him. Something has happened, she said. He told her. Not everything, the shape of it, the seriousness of it. Ada sat with this information. She had a question she did not ask that evening. The question was whether there was anything she could have done differently, whether she had enabled the spending rather than simply enjoyed it, whether she had been a presence in that house that made careful choices harder rather than easier. She did not ask the question, but it was there. Over the following year, the surface revealed itself completely. Properties were sold, vehicles returned, staff reduced, then the house itself. The day they moved out of the house, Vivian had stood in the entrance hall, the same entrance hall where she had felt completely certain she had made the right choice, and had looked at the space that was now empty of everything they had filled it with. She had understood in that moment that she had not been wrong to want a beautiful life. She had been wrong to believe that a beautiful surface and a beautiful life were the same thing. She had not understood that yet, but she had begun to. Now, let me tell you about Vivian during these same years. Because the early years were everything she had designed them to be. The house was large and real. The furniture was chosen from places that had staff who knew them by name. There were people in certain rooms who recognized Chidi and by extension recognized Vivian, and the recognition had a specific quality that she had always wanted to live inside. She was genuinely happy, not performing happiness, genuinely inside it. There was a specific evening she would remember later. She and Chidi had come home from an event, and the house was lit, and her dress was one of the beautiful ones, and Chidi had said something that made her laugh, and she had stood in their entrance hall and felt with complete sincerity that she had made the exact right choice. She had not been wrong to feel that way. She had simply not understood that a feeling can be completely genuine and still be standing on something that will not hold. Chidi had a quality that Vivian had mistaken for confidence. It was not confidence. It was the absence of the specific anxiety that tells a person when to be careful. He grew up inside money and had not developed the relationship with its limits that people who have built money from smaller amounts tend to develop. He trusted the surface. He had always trusted the surface. The surface had always held, until it did not. The business made decisions over 18 months that individually seemed manageable and collectively were not. A contract that was supposed to anchor their largest quarter fell through when the client restructured. Two investments that had looked reliable revealed themselves to be neither. The company's overhead, which had been sized for the revenue they had expected to maintain, became a problem that each month's numbers confirmed rather than resolved. Chidi's accountant came to him with the specific expression of someone who has been trying to raise an alarm through appropriate channels for too long and has decided that directness is now the only remaining option. Sir, the situation is serious. Chidi looked at the numbers for the first time in the focused way rather than the peripheral way. He did not speak for a while. How serious? He finally asked. The kind where what we do in 90 days determines whether we are still discussing this in 90 days. Chidi went home that evening. Vivian saw his face. What happened? She asked. He told her. Not everything. The shape of it. The seriousness of it. Vivian sat with this information. She had a question she did not ask that evening. The question was whether there was anything she could have done differently, whether she had enabled the spending rather than simply enjoyed it, whether she had been a presence in that house that made careful choices harder rather than easier. She did not ask the question, but it was there. Over the following year, the surface revealed itself completely. Properties were sold, vehicles returned, staff reduced, then the house itself. The day they moved out of the house, Vivian had stood in the entrance hall, the same entrance hall where she had felt completely certain she had made the right choice, and had looked at the space that was now empty of everything they had filled it with. She had understood in that moment that she had not been wrong to want a beautiful life. She had been wrong to believe that a beautiful surface and a beautiful life were the same thing. She had not understood that yet, but she had begun to. They moved first to a smaller house, and then to a rented flat in a part of the city that was decent, but was not what Vivian had imagined for herself. Rose came to visit one afternoon. They sat in the rented flat, which was clean and modest, and which Vivian had arranged with as much care as the contents allowed. Rose tried to find words. Then she made the choice that changed the afternoon. She mentioned Ada. Your sister is well, she said, not innocently. Vivian looked at her. What do you mean? Emeka's business. It has grown significantly. Vivian was quiet. They have a house in the city now, a proper one. She paused. And Ada is expecting. Vivian looked at her mother. Then she looked out of the window of the rented flat. She sat with this for a long time. Something moved in her chest that she identified as jealousy, because jealousy was the nearest available word. But it was more specific than jealousy. It was the feeling of someone who has been standing in one place long enough to understand what the other place would have felt like. Then Rose said something unexpected. Adan never told me what she actually gave up, she said quietly. She just agreed. She never asked me to acknowledge it. She never reminded me of it. She stopped. I have been thinking about that for a long time. Vivian looked at her mother. You asked her to understand, Vivian said. Do you remember? She said she needed you to know it was costing her something. Yes, Rose said. Did you understand it at the time? Rose was quiet. No, she said finally. Not the way I should have. Vivian turned back to the window. Neither did I, she said. Vivian went to find Ada. She did not call first. She arrived at the house, which was real and solid and had a garden that Ada had clearly been tending with the organized attention she brought to everything. A small child was playing near the gate. Vivian stopped. The child looked up. He had Ada's eyes. Vivian stood for a moment longer than she intended. Ada came out. She saw Vivian. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ada said, "Come in." Vivian came in. They sat in a room that was not opulent but was genuinely inhabited. Books on a shelf, a drawing a child had made on one wall, a photograph of Ada and Emeka on another. The specific quality of a room that has been lived in rather than arranged for visitors. Ada brought tea. Vivian looked around without speaking. Then she said, "I owe you something." Ada looked at her. "I owe you the acknowledgement that I took something from you. Not the argument that it was complicated or that I was afraid or that I did not know what would happen. Just the acknowledgement." She paused. "I took something that was yours and I convinced myself I deserved it, and I am sorry." Ada was quiet for a moment. This was not what she had expected. She had expected the version of the conversation where Vivian tried to reframe the past in a way that distributed blame more evenly. She had prepared for that conversation. She had prepared what she would say and what she would not say, and what she was willing to hear and what she was not willing to hear. She had not prepared for this. "Thank you," Ada said, "for saying that directly." Vivian looked at her hands. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Did you know in the beginning? Did you have any sense that Emeka would become what he became?" Ada thought about the question honestly. "No," she said. "I had no idea about the land or the partnership or any of it." She paused. "What I knew was that he answered a question honestly when a safer answer was available, and that he laughed genuinely at something I said when he had no reason to be in the mood for genuine laughter." She looked at her tea. "I knew that those two things pointed towards someone I could build something with. I did not know what the something would be." Vivian was quiet. "I was looking at the wrong things," she said. "You were looking at real things," Ada said. "Security is a real thing. Wanting a good life is a real thing. You were just looking at the version of those things that sits on the surface." She paused. "I was lucky enough to be looking at what was underneath." Vivian looked at her sister. "Were you afraid in the beginning? Did you ever doubt it?" Ada smiled. "There was an evening in the 4th month when I sat in our kitchen alone and thought very carefully about whether I had made the right choice." "And?" Vivian asked. "And I did not arrive at certainty. I arrived at enough to keep going, enough to believe that what we were building was being built on something real. That was all I needed." Vivian was quiet. Then she said, something Ada did not expect. "I think I knew, in the yard at Daddy's funeral, when you helped him with the cooler. I watched you do that, and something in me knew what it meant about you both, what it said about him and what it said about you." She stopped. "I knew and I chose not to know." Ada looked at her sister. "Vivian." "Yes." "What are you doing now? How are you managing?" Vivian looked slightly surprised by the question. "I started a small sewing business near where we are staying. It is not much, but it is mine. I built it. It is the first thing I have built." She paused. "How does that feel?" Ada asked. Vivian thought about it. "Like standing on something solid, for the first time," she said quietly. Ada smiled. "Then you have something I did not give you, and Emeka did not give me. Something you found yourself." Vivian looked at her. "Hold on to that," Ada said. Vivian left the house in the late afternoon. She walked differently than she had arrived. Not with happiness, not with resolution, with the specific quality of someone who has set down something they have been carrying and is still noticing the absence of the weight, still adjusting to the lighter feeling, still learning what it means to walk without it. On a quiet evening some months later, Ada and Emeka sat in the garden, while their son played nearby with the focused attention that small children bring to investigations of the natural world. Ada watched him. Emeka sat beside her. They were quiet in the way of people who have been together long enough that silence is not a gap to be filled, but a space to share. "Vivian called me," Emeka said. Ada looked at him. "She and Chidi have separated formally," he said. She sounded calm. She mentioned the sewing business. Ada nodded. She sounded like herself, Emeka said. More like herself than I remember her sounding. Ada was quiet. Then she said, "My father told me something once." Emeka looked at her. "He came to my door one evening after something had happened with Vivian, something small. He just stood in the doorway and said, 'I know, I see it. You have more character than you know what to do with.'" He paused. He said, "One day that will be worth something." Emeka waited. Ada went on. "I did not know what he meant. I thought he meant it would be rewarded somehow, that the character would produce a visible outcome." She watched her son examine a leaf with the full attention that only children bring to leaves. "But I don't think that's what he meant," Emeka asked. "What do you think he meant?" Ada thought about it. "I think he meant that character is its own worth, not that it produces good outcomes, though sometimes it does, but that to be the person who acts from it is itself the thing. The reward is being that person." She paused. "The life we have is good, the house is good, the business is good, but the thing I would not trade is being the person I am inside it. That is what he was trying to tell me." Emeka was quiet. Then he said, "Your father was a wise man." "He was," Ada said. They watched the boy. He had found something in the grass that required his complete and undivided attention. Ada smiled. "He has your focus," she said. "And your eyes," Emeka said. "And his grandfather's quality," Ada said. They sat there as the evening came in over the garden and the light changed in the way it changes in that specific part of the day when something is ending and something else is not yet beginning but is very close. Ada thought about her father's room, the smell of eucalyptus oil and closed windows, the thin hands on the blanket, the weak squeeze. She thought about a promise she had made to a dying man. She thought about everything she thought she was losing when she made it. She looked at the garden, at the house behind her, at the boy in the grass, at the man beside her. She smiled. One day, that will be worth something. Yes, Daddy, she thought. Yes, it will. If this story reached something in you today, like this video right now and subscribe to this channel. Share it with one person who is facing a choice that looks like loss and needs to hear that the path that looks smaller is not always the one that leads to less. Drop your country in the comments below. I want to see where this story travels. And tell me, do you think Vivian deserved what happened to her, or did life deal with her more harshly than she deserved? Leave your honest answer below. I read every comment. I see every country. I will see you in the next story. The end.